I said it's a very critical part of your research. Why do you think these topics are very critical? Okay.
Prof, it
Yes,
seems
you
like,
can ask a question.
oh, sorry. I just noticed now that you've started recording. I was about to ask if this session is recorded, but I just
Okay,
got a
sure.
message now. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so and my question is this: why do you think this part of our presentation is very important in your research, which is what? Literature review, theoretical framework, and conceptual framework. Why do you think one after the other, one person should take one, and then when we come to the next one, the person will take another one? Why do you think literature review is very important?
Prof, to my side, I'm not sure if I was supposed to raise my hand first, but to my understanding, as a researcher, you might find yourself researching something that it has already been solved. So when you look at the literature review, it's more like looking at what has been done so that you can find a gap there as to how much you solve that gap so that you can have a broader understanding of what's going on. So when it comes to theoretical framework and conceptual framework, that's where I'm waiting for this class to some kind of guide me, because from my understanding, when you look at theoretical framework and conceptual framework, it's more on aligning yourself in terms of what theories are there, so that whatsoever limitation that you have identified from the literature, it can guide you in terms of your research. That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Another person?
Yeah, so in terms of a theoretical framework, I think it's just I think the two phrases or terms go hand in hand, sort of. So the literature review is just basically getting a background of what you're going to do your research on, and then the theoretical framework is sort of the, how do I put it, the foundation of the research. So you'll have the theoretical framework as well, and then the conceptual framework is just the type of concepts that you'll be using in terms of the research.
Okay. Mash?
Okay. All right. Like, yeah, as they were saying, like the literature review is just all about writing everything that has been researched on in relation to your topic. And the theoretical framework, what I know about the theoretical frameworks that we have, theoretical frameworks like your unified theory of acceptance and use of technology, technology acceptance model. It's like they guide your research in terms of your research questions, your research objectives, and the conceptual framework is like how you're gonna use the theoretical framework that you have chosen in your research, how you can like conceptualize it for your research. Yes, that's what I know. I don't know
Okay.
if I was audible. Yes.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you guys so much. Now let me, you guys have tried, you did your best. But now this three section is what the today's class is all about. Literature review, which you alluded that is all about trying to establish gap through existing literature in order for you to do overstretch what has been addressed or what has been covered. Fine. And then theoretical framework and conceptual framework, we're going to see them in detail. So let's look at it. So at the end of this presentation, please guys, I want you guys to understand that you need to be able to understand the literature review, theoretical framework, and conceptual framework. By the end of this presentation, you'll be able to understand this, because that's what the study is going to cover. Also, you should be able to understand the importance of them all in our research. Because oftentimes the mismatch between the challenge between these three components of a research is that many times people don't really know why they do them. It's because it's part of what they need to write, to discuss. They just discuss. They just keep talking without knowing fully well why they are doing it. And then at the end of the day, you find out that there will be some lapses in that very document because there is no link between the topic, the research objective, the objective, the problem statement, and other key area of the research. They are all disjointed. There is no connection. Because of what? There is lack of what? Proper understanding and lack of proper alignment to the study. And that is a very big issue. So now, sorry. Now, what is now in terms of literature review? Now, let's understand is that literature review, every research today, everything is researchable. Everything can be researched. But in order for you to research on that, which you want to research, there is a need for you to understand what other people have done, what other people have covered, in order for you to pitch your own tent, your own knowledge on what they have done and the area that have not been covered. That's why it's okay that I'm going to focus on this area based on that this study have not been done in this sector, in that area, and on so many others. So it involves a critical analysis and your ability to synthesize existing research. In order for you to do what? Analyze. In order for you to do what? Collect, analyze, critique existing research to do what? To establish your own question, your own opinion, the gap that is missing in that very research. Because now, and remember that academic research is like what we talked about from the beginning of this class, that there is a distinction between academic and everyday research. And academic research has a process it must follow, and that process must be rooted on existing argument, on existing knowledge. Now, you are asked to write your problem statement. The problem statement you are writing, do you see that very problem? The answer is no. It's not like you are solving a problem that you can touch, or or maybe directly affecting you. No. But when you're able to explore existing literature, you are able to understand what has been covered and what is not yet covered, and that becomes your research gap. So it is very important for you to use your literature review for this objective, to identify area of study, to identify problem in the study, to identify the missing link, to evaluate, to set aside, to analyze, to provide a comprehensive understanding of the topic at hand. So when you're able to analyze existing literature, that will enable you to do what? To have a broader view of that very topic which you want to undertake or which you are currently doing, which also assists you to identify the gap that is currently existing in that very area of the study. Because oftentimes you find out that researchers at the end of at the part of their conclusion or before their conclusion, they provide a future direction that will enable other researchers to go into. That I have done this as a researcher. We have done this as a researcher. However, going into the future, look at the area that can be focused on. Now, if you didn't evaluate that literature, you can't be able to spot out what the future research where it's going to. So you find out that the literature review assists you to do what? To map out what you can actually study, what you can actually research on. Now, there are key sources and database to be used in order for you to do your literature review. Guys, are we following? There are what? There are key places, there are key sources that assist you to provide you that very literature that will enable you to do that, to carry out that very research. And one of those key places, key area will be to do what? To get your literatures, your articles, your materials, your resources through your Google Scholar, through your Med, through your Scopus, Google Scholars, Web of Science, and even institutional repository, library. That is the places you can go to find access to what? To material, government data, non-profit organizational research data and everything. These are the repository. This is a place you can go to find what? The literature that can assist you to do these things. Okay, so these key resources provide access to a wider range of what? Scholarly articles. So whether you go to Google Scholar, it has multiples, millions of materials on different formats, whether it's going to be, and also where it was published, whether it's going to be a conference proceeding, whether it is a research article, and so many other things. So the literature review is available for you. It's not for you to do what? To use it. Very important. In terms of sometimes people will say, okay, I have searched, I can't find literature about my topic. No. There are some studies that have limited literature. There are some studies that you can see that literature have been overflooded across these resourceful centers, right? But very important, if you are doing a study that have limited literature, what you simply need to do is for you to be flexible on the use of your keywords. Okay, on the use of your keywords. Use keywords. Don't stick to one particular keyword and you think that very particular keyword will give you every resources that you need for that very study. The answer is no. You need to be able to do what? To search, to change your keywords, to change your search engine keywords in order to improve the chance of you getting more literatures, both on the part of whether you are doing something that is currently oversaturated, something that is very new. Do your research very well. Search this online platform, search this online databases that will enable you to enrich your available resources.
I think there's people who are asking to be let into the meeting.
Sorry?
There are a few students who are asked to get let into the meeting.
No, they're in. I've done that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Prof, on that point that you just raised, sorry to intervene because I had my hand raised for quite some time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, especially on the issue that you just touched about limited research on the basis of the topic that I might be working on. You've mentioned the keyword part, right? So, Prof, from your side as a researcher, how confident are you in terms of the resources which NWU are putting there for us so that you can kind of research about what is happening on the basis of our topic? Because most often, I mean, an issue of keywords, I think we have dealt with it during our honors level, and now we're still having the same issue. And now we are questioning the subscription of the university to say, does it subscribe to a lot of repositories from other universities to make this flexible so that at the end of the day, I don't have to clash with my supervisor and say, but no, you haven't done it enough. you might have missed this and that. So from your side as a researcher, are you confident in terms of a repository which NW provide to its research community, or it's something that we as a student we must work around it, like find our way out? Like I'm just looking
Okay.
at it in a balanced way, so that we don't get our side pointing and just say, but you didn't check this, you didn't check this. But from your side, as a researcher, as a knowledgeable or an expert in research, are you comfortable or confident with the research resources that you have as an institution, that when you come and say to me as a student, as a junior researcher, to say, but you didn't check it enough. From your side, from what you've seen, are you
Okay.
confident that the
Okay.
results are there? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Now let me ask. You mean on the university library, right?
Yes, because that's
Thank you.
where I get access to more resources than other
Okay.
repositories. Yes.
Okay. Now remember that there is no way you can depend on one source to get access to your material. So what I can say to you is to use search wide, look widely for you to get access to material. Don't depend only on that which you were taught or which you knew. For example, if you go today, one of the biggest search engine in terms of repository of academic document is where Google Scholar, right? That Google Scholar is much more. Google Scholar, I can say, has more, and it can be more up to date than some of let's say Web of Science and everything, because these ones are focusing mainly on what is within for example, Scopus give you access to those materials that is indexed on Scopus, the journals indexed on Scopus. But your Google Scholar goes beyond that, whether it can give you access to document on Web of Science, ResearchGate, different institutions. However, there are some publishers that also publish subscription journals, and then that is where now institutions like ours also comes in to provide you access to some of those resources that you cannot that is you can't get the complete version of it online, and that's where they comes in. Okay, so use our university resource provided resources, and then also go as far as using other indexing houses for you to be able to get access to your materials. So don't limit yourself to one. Be versatile in your search. Thank you. Okay, so now it's very important. So now we can understand that access to material is bound on what, on different resources, and also bound on what, the kind of keywords we use. So always play around with your keywords. When you, let's say that it's okay, the impact of generative AI on students, right? If I look at this, why can't also instead of using that impact, change that very impact to be another keyword? Let's say the influence or the usage of generative AI by students. Now you have been using higher education students, make it students, right? So by you shopping around with your keywords, adding and subtracting in your keywords, that will enable you to get access to more resources than just sticking to one. Because as sometimes students will say, I don't have access, I don't see material, but the only problem they have is because the way they play around with their keywords. So the resources are there. Some can be in open access, some can be in a subscription, Then now maybe the institution subscribe to that publisher. That makes it easy. Okay, and some that is open there means what, that you can have access to that very document, the full version of that very document, without paying for it or something of that nature. So be versatile and use your keyword flexibly, so you can get access to what, a wider range of materials. Okay. So now, and also in your literature review, which involves different aspects, because your literature review covers different angle of your study. And now it's also very important for you to look at the major themes and the headings and topics which you need to discuss in your literature review. Because sometimes people can, because they are too excited, they can see resources, they can see materials. Now they begin to write in a way that deviates away from what the topic is all about. One thing I tell students is this: in order for you to have a structured and more accurate literature review, what you need to do is to build your themes and your headings around your topic. Automatically, meaning what, that your research objectives was built around your topic. So what you need to do as a person when you're doing your research review is to be able to do what? Use your research objectives. Use those objectives to form your themes, your headings, your subheadings, and then you can now add more. Because let's say now you have 4 or 3 research objectives. You can't have just three literature review headings. You can add more, looking at the background of that topic, looking at maybe the history of that very topic, and so many other things. If from doing that, you can have a good attractive headings in combination with your word, with your research, with the headings you can have from your research objective. Very important. You can also look at what other people who have done similar study like yours have done, how they were able to build their headings. That can also assist you to also build your own headings, not just copy and pasting from their own headings. That will guide you to able to coin out your own headings based on your research objectives and your research topic. Okay, that is very, very important. Also, there is aspect of what critical review and analysis of existing literature. This involves evaluating the strength and the weakness of a previous studies, identify the inconsistencies or the gap in the literature. By what? Having that kind of summarized finding, that will help you to build more insight. By the time you are able to have to look at the positive aspect of what you are doing, literatures in that field, the negative aspect, the strength and the weaknesses, that will also enable you to come up with your own unique literatures, headings that will guide you through your study. So this process involves what? A systematic approach in assessing the quality of evidence, methodology, and the theoretical frameworks that is within that your research. Also, in your literature review, you should also be able to identify gaps, which we have talked about before now. But now, this gap include what? Inconsistency of findings from existing studies, right? Which also will provide that what the limited exploration of a specific subtopics, which is within this broader area of your study, and as well as what? Insufficient attention, the area that are giving sufficient attention in the population. Very, very important. Now you have read the literature, people are doing this very your studying, looking at focusing on students. That's to show that what? Looking at that very topic, another population is also possible. Maybe if it's let's say generative AI, why not look at it from the perspective of the lecturers? Why not look at it from the perspective of administrative staffs? Why not look at it from the perspective of the management at large? From a particular department, let's say IT department in this case right now, our CTL that provide what learning technology. Why not also look at it from that perspective? So you can only understand the area, the populations that have been covered in literature when you are able to look at the existing literatures. So a literature review give you that very footing, that very understanding to know the population, the context that have been covered in the study. That will also give you an idea to look at the area, the population I'm going to choose for this particular study, because all the people have been covering in this very population. Let me also look a different population. So literature review is very, very important. So by addressing the critical gap, right, for advancing knowledge and understanding the field, it also guides you for future research effort and then making an informed decision based on what is obtainable in practice. You're not just coming up with a topic based on what you think, but your topic is now based on existing literature that what people have done it in this area, but that area have not been covered. So this is what your literature review can really help you to achieve in your study. So in fact, literature review is not just repeating what others have done, but it has a lot to do because it gives you deeper insight, more understanding, more wider understanding on what was done and what have not been done. Okay. Yes, can I ask
Prof.
a question?
Yeah, thank you for that. From what you've just said about the literature, identifying the gap, knowing from a manager's perspective, employee level perspective. I remember on the document that you just shared with us on the expectations about the deliverables or on every assignment, individual deliverables, right? There's a diagram at the top there that states to say where does the topic come from.
Okay.
Like there's a part whereby there's an arrow talking about literature, and there is an arrow talking about you as a curious person to look at what you think is limited. So I'm just trying to get an understanding as to if maybe the topic that I just came with is something which I saw a limitation, and it's not informed by literature. So how do I then come about when I have to align to what is a gap? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Okay. There are different ways one can also come. Coming up with a research gap or research topic does not really settle with literature review, right? For example, you're working in a specific industry, right? And then based on the way things are, the systems or whatever is being used, that can also informs you doing research in that very area, because that is what is you understand, that is what you practice every day, and look at you understand there is a gap. We have been doing this, is how we do this, we manage these processes in our organization now, but something is wrong. There's a gap here. Now when you look at that very gap was not informed by literature, right? But when you frame up that very idea, research idea, you go and search about it in the literature. Definitely, you will possibly see that people are already talking about it. Now, the only difference now that they are talking about it, but not in your organization. But now, what informs you into that kind of thinking of that very research was not because of any literature. But when you bring it, because it's you're going to write an academic document, your argument should be backed by literatures, existing views, whether on the positive, on the negative, or the neutral part, or any of that, right? That is very important. So now, when you bring it into academic environment, you need to be able to justify that's your position, that's your problem that you find in your company with existing literatures, because you don't need to write based on what I think. Remember, you don't write based on your perception as a researcher. You get what I'm saying? So you're not going to be writing based on as if you're writing a report, or you're making an investigation report, investigative report to the manager, to your boss in your company. No. Now you are going to write an academic tone. So now you use that your personal experience in your company, and then write it in academic way. By so doing, the academic tone you're going to write with you're going to write it on is based on what? Literature. Because when you go into the literature, you find out people might have written things about it, but not as much. That's why I talk about that your research area which you are writing on may have a limited literature, but people already have written about it, whether in South Africa, whether here in Africa, whether in America, in Australia, in Asia, different part of the world, someone have written something like that. Maybe using a different population. Now you're talking about you're in IT industry, right? And now someone have written about it, let's say in a retail industry, but it's the same thing. But these are two different populations. These are two different sectors. Someone have written about it in a banking, in a financial institution. When you are in a education institution. So that is, so bring that your personal view and then merge it with academic way, so that you can be able to make it academic document. Watalohan.
Catalogna, Prof. Kautwara, thanks. Catalogna, because yeah, you are right to the extent whereby, okay, I've identified a problem from where I've seen it, but I should take it further to say there might be some research whereby someone have identified the same thing, so that kind of application will inform what I've identified, so that you can kind of build on what I've identified, so that I can put that as evidence that it's not a problem that I've seen, but it's always there. Thank you, Prof.
Yes. Sure. Yes, thank you. When there was a frequent load shedding, right? There will be a load shedding anywhere in the world, right? So when someone said, but no, this just started. This just a new something in South Africa. No, people have had blackouts on a consistent base in somewhere. So you need to also borrow their knowledge, whatever they have written, to join what you are currently facing. If there are limited resources, materials in South Africa, let's say the time load shedding started, and that is it. And now generative AI is a new world of research today. But when it started, when ChatGPT started in 2022 November, there was the limited resources. But today now, that when you go online, there are a lot of resources, literature that have covered different areas of generative AI across different fields of endeavor. So, but there are still areas that have not been covered within a particular geographical area, and so on and so forth. Yes.
Okay, sorry, Prof, and colleagues on the call. I'm not trying to create a dialogue here. Prof, okay, from methodology perspective, if maybe I wanna use literature as my methodology, like literature review as my methodology, like to what extent must I justify the problem itself? Thank you.
Okay. Now, you mean like to use it in a place of, let's say, quantitative or qualitative, right? Sorry, in a place of collecting data, right?
Sorry, Prof. Sorry, Prof.
I say you mean to use the literature in a place of collecting data, physical primary data.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, there are research is not only limited to collecting primary data. No. There are different kinds of literature review, which different kinds of research methodology, which you saw in one of the presentations, right? Now, very important is this. if you want to do a literature review, if I take literature review as your research methodology, within literature review, there are different kinds of literature review methods. You have your systematic review, have your scoping review, you have your critical review, you have your narrative review, rapid review, and so many others. They are all there. So now, if you want to use it as your benchmark in your study, fine. Then now you need to choose any of that. But in this case, then it can be because this is an academic, this is a thesis, right? Where you can, the tool that is much more prominent in that to give you enough data, enough information will be your systematic review or your scoping review, because these two, for example, have a laid down approach. For example, under systematic review, you can use a Prisma principle. Now, if you follow that Prisma principle, automatically you need to follow it in detail from your search to the end of literature you're going to use. It's still possible for you to use it to write your story. You need to be specific in one and then follow it to the letter, and there you can go. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Thank you for such insight.
Okay. Now, so we are done with literature review. We are now in the part of theoretical framework. Very important, guys. What is a theoretical framework? Some of you have responded to it at the beginning of this class. But now look at this. It is a structured outline, right, that justifies the import and the feasibility of a research study, laying the foundation of existing knowledge and guiding the research process. What does that mean? That a theoretical framework is existing knowledge that have been built to that understand how things should be implemented, on how research should be guided, or how research findings should be implemented. Now, that is what a theoretical framework. It's a framework that has been developed to guide researchers in coming up with a new knowledge, in guiding the research processes, and so on and so on and so forth, which provide the foundation for defining the study, philosophical, methodological, and analytical processes, guiding the researchers in the process of that very research. Now, in that environment, what is simply going to enable you to do as a researcher is going to bring about credibility, in-depth knowledge, and make your research much more generalizable in terms of academic rigor and processes. Now, and that is what theoretical framework. We're going to come to the conceptual framework, which is another part of the same framework. So now, it's okay. I want to look at the behavior of the people, right, in terms of how they use technology. Someone have already built a model, a theory that have studied how people behave or view technology. Now, what you're simply going to, that is what theoretical framework, existing model, existing knowledge that can guide future research processes. Now, use that very framework that has those components to test, to study within the parameter of those components in your own population on how their behavior towards this particular technology that is in vogue. Let's right now, ChatGPT or generative AI at large. Their student behavior, or how it changes their behavior. Someone has built something with component that shapes, that if you want to talk about behavioral study in terms of technological acceptance, look at this. This component will guide you to understand people's behavior in use of technology. Now, it's okay. I'm doing is related to people's behavior in terms of using technology. I'm going to adopt this framework to test it within my population. So it is an existing framework with processes that can be tested to make. Now, in terms of that generalization, means what whatever you find out can be okay, that can be applied to the rest of the population. So there are different kinds of theories. Remember, it can be called a framework. It can be called a theory. It can be called a model. It sometimes can be interchangeable among these terms. Now, in our field of information system research, there are a couple of theories, model, framework that is existing. There are many of them. One of the prominent one that many of you have used or have seen is TEM, Technology Acceptance Model or Framework. This framework looks at what? On how people, what influences people to accept technology. The terms, the factors that you can say that influences people in accepting technology, their perceived usefulness, their this, their that, and that. So now, when you want to do something that looks at what? People's acceptance of technology, that can be a suitable framework to adopt. We have a unified theory of acceptance and use of technology, which considers perception, expectancy, effort, social influence, and others that are being considered and also in acceptance of what? Technology. But now, if I want to look at technology acceptance, it can be looked from this perspective on the expectancy, on the effort, on the social influence, on the facilitating factors, and so many and other and all that. These are the things that this researcher, this framework tend to okay. These are the things that influence technology acceptance. We have another one that says revised technology acceptance model R10, which has a 5-layer conceptual framework, which is a 5-layer conceptual framework that focuses on what? On indigenous component that can be considered in acceptance of what? Technology. May I tell you that all these frameworks are all existing there that can now guide. Now it's okay, fine. I want to look at technology acceptance in terms of people using generative AI. But now we're living in South Africa, which also have some element of indigenous factors that can affect people to accept this technology. And now we look at other two which I've talked about. They didn't have all those kind of variables. So, okay, I'm going to look at this R10 to underscore my study into my study. Or you can have a combination of more than one framework. It's allowed, whereby you take a component from that framework, a component from that very framework, and imagine together towards you carrying out your study. Or you can take a framework as it is and use it in your study without altering or modifying it either way. So the revised framework was developed by me and some other scholars. We're looking at what? The indigenous aspect of why people that influence people to accept what? Technology. Okay? And so now, whichever one you are choosing, there are many of them. So I just use these two. Whichever one you use, there's something that's very important among them. You must be able to justify why you have chosen that very framework. And that is where many students get confused. They just discuss them and provide a very detailed literature about them. But in their discussions, there is lack of what? Element of what? Justification and how they're going to use it. Because any framework you use must have a direct, I didn't say direct influence on your study. So in order for you to achieve that, what is very important for that framework to have a direct effect on your studies to do what? Let that framework you are choosing build your model your research questions around it. For example, you're looking at student perception about generative AI in what? In improving their academic performance, right? Now, when you choose any of these, right? Let's say you choose 10, which has an element of that one, perceived usefulness, right? Now, the meaning was that part, that component of 10 should be able to do what? To influence your objective, meaning what? You're going to look at what? To determine the perceived usefulness of what? Of generative AI on students' performance. Are you following? So that is how it can have a direct impact to your study, and not just what? Having it as a section of your literature, of a discussion, a section of your proposal or your study, without having any bearing to the study. And the how part is okay. Based on this, you're going to use this very component, this very framework, to achieve 1, 2, 3. This framework, I'm using it, but I'm taking only the 2 components of it, which inform the perceived usefulness, and maybe you take another one from elsewhere, the social influence. Take another one from elsewhere that looks at what? The SAP. Because if you go to revised term, it has the component that says SAP, which is what? Social and economic and political factors. You look at what? Does social, economic, and political factors affect students to do what? To adopt generative AI towards the academic performance. And that is how this framework can have a direct link to your study. Another part of this framework is what? A conceptual framework. We saw that a theoretical framework is an existing model framework, right? You have to borrow and apply to your study. And a conceptual framework is what? It's a visual or a written outline that illustrates the relationship between among the key components, which guides the research objective and the research design. In this case right now, a theoretical framework is owner's framework, researcher's idea. Conceptual framework is an existing framework. Why a conceptual framework is your own idea.
Prof, I've
It
got
is
my
your
hands
own.
up. I've got my hand up.
Yes, I can see it now. Yes.
Yeah, with regard to the previous slide, if maybe you can go back to the previous slide, please.
Okay.
The previous slide, I'm still on the conceptual framework slide.
Yes, I'm there.
Yeah, thank you. So, Prof, like what I'm seeing here, seems like each model it kind of derived from one another. Like the initial ones, it speaks about accepting the model, technology acceptance, unified, which I assume that there was an acceptance, then there's a unification as part of research, then revised based on what has been unified and what has been accepted. So, like my question, like, don't we have a model on rejection or denial? Oh, yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, because as a researcher,
Okay.
when for instance, if I go for acceptance, obviously I might be a bit biased to look on what are the respondents accepting as part of my research topic, like you've highlighted about ChatGPT on students, how it does the work easy, how it does things simple. So from a denial perspective or rejection perspective, how will you then measure it? Is there a model for that, or those theories they do accommodate those kind of response that you as a researcher will get as part of your research? Yeah, that's my question. Like in a nutshell, rejection, denial models, aren't they there? Thanks.
Okay. Remember. If you go online and type information systems research model or framework, you will see a whole. There is that I've come across a page that has quite a number of them in their tens. I don't know if it's up to hundreds. Like a list of different frameworks that can be used in information system research. Now, so based on what you're asking, the key term, which is denial or rejection. Now, of course, there will be something in that line which may not have the term like the heading denial framework, which may not. You just have to. I have not come across that, but they should have something like that because research didn't start today. It's long in history with us. So there might be now. Even if there is not, right? Even if there is not, that is why you have to, what the question, the comment you made says that you can see that these frameworks are not more or less being built from one to another, right? If there is not, that is where now the part of the conceptual framework comes in. That you have looked at all these frameworks, they have not covered what you want to cover. That is where now you can now build your own to cover what is not existing in any of the frameworks you have discussed, that people have applied in your topic, but none of them have discussed that area of, let's say, denial or wherever. Okay, and that becomes your what, a conceptual framework that you have gotten ideas, a component from these two or one, but none of that one you adopted, you choose those components from, didn't cover this aspect, and that becomes your what, your conceptual what, framework. Now you build your research objective around those key components of your own conceptual framework, and now you go and test it. Remember, it's all about testing. You go and test it with your research instrument. And now, depending on what you want to look into, people can say, okay, yes or no. If they say yes, that automatically means what? That keyword of denial is also another thing to consider in terms of accepting what? Technology. And now when you publish your work, people say, wow, so this is something else. Now people can also research using your framework to build their own research and come up with their own findings. So it's all about modification. Remember, research is all about recycling. Redoing something over and over. Where you stop, someone again will pick up from there and continue. And someone will pick from there and continue. You can even come back and pick up from where you stop and still continue. We continue researching, building new knowledge, new understanding, new insight. Okay, and that is it. So I'm not sure, but you can always search to know if there's anyone that have that very particular component. If not, that is also a research gap that we're talking about in terms of literature. One tell hand. Literature review.
Yeah, Prof. Thanks.
Okay, sure. Okay, so a literature a concept framework, which is what is look at the highlighted yellow part. Say what? It's a researcher's concept. Whether it was borrowed from anywhere, fine. But you borrow those ideas from one or two frameworks to build your own. It is your own concept. When you're also going to pay citation or acknowledgement to where you get those components from, and then the one you added on your own based on what you read on literatures and everything. So it helps the researchers to construct an coherent explanation of a relationship between variables, which in that case, right, is going to have a connection, a connecting line that links each of them, which giving a guide to exploring the research problem in a systematic or integrated manner, which also helps you now to study more of that. To write, okay, let's say now your component is denial. you go and read about more things people are talking about on denial in terms of technology. Because of what? You have it as a component. You go and read more. You go and research more about it because you want to write about that. You want to have a deeper knowledge about when people are talking about denial in technology, what it's all about, different body of knowledge, arguments, views that have come into that. Also, a conceptual variable relationship, which is what the main component. Every framework, whether conceptual, theoretical framework, has what? Components or factors or attributes or constructs, which are all directly linked together, right? And sometimes these constructs are not really linked together. Now, bear this in mind. Sometimes when you see a framework, there is a line that moves from point A to point B, from one construct to another. Meaning what? There is a direct there's a relationship. And this relationship can be a strong relationship or weak relationship. So when you see a very straight line, thick or thin, whichever one, there's a direct relationship. When that is dotted line between two components or across the components, meaning what? There is what? A weak relationship. However, those relationships are also important in what? Underpinning that very in that very conceptual framework. So these variables are interconnected through relationship that depict how each influence each other within that very framework. How perceived usefulness affects behavior. How behavior affects final usage, acceptance, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I consider framework application, structuring and organizing by key components and relationship. Then you have to consider the definition and the purpose. So when you have a conceptual framework, please don't just leave it that way. You need to be able to define and explain the purpose of each of the components in that very framework, and also provide the relationship that exists within them, and then which also being depicted by visual representation connecting to your research design. So in this case right now, your conceptual framework should be able to connect to your research design. Now, in this framework, it's very important for you to understand that a conceptual framework is also very important in this for you as a researcher. It provides what? A clarified researcher perspective and guiding the investigation. Like I said in a theoretical framework, you don't just put a conceptual framework or these frameworks and just leave it there. No, it is there to guide your perspective. This is how I look at this. When I talk about accepting technology, in this case, generative AI, look at the way I am looking at it. Look at what I believe as a researcher that can influence people to accept this technology. Also, it also identifies the gap in literature and suggests a potential contribution to the field. By you having that conceptual framework, invariably you are telling the reader, you are telling the wider population, the reader of your document, that no, there is a gap among other frameworks, that what you have depicted as your own is a solution to that very gap, which automatically provide a contribution to the field of what? The knowledge, which also inform decision and interpretation of your findings. In general, it's going to tell you that what? Look at the kind of thing you are going to find out from your study. Because remember, you are going to test those components through your research instrument, right? Automatically, you want to find out if this or that does influence acceptance of what? Acceptance of what? Technology. By so doing, what you are simply saying that what? That this component, this variable, this factor have an impact on what? Accepting this technology in this very sector and that very sector. So meanwhile, that is the shape of what you intend to find out. However, sometimes what you depicted may not be the case. Now, let me explain this. You may have 5 or 6 components in your conceptual framework, and then after conducting your data, you do your analysis, and then using all these statistical analysis, you find out that out of those 6 components which you initially designed, it's only 4 or 3 is what your respondents, what your participants are saying. Yes, only these 3 components have what? An influence in us. Remember, I'm talking about people, right? In us accepting what? This technology. Then your final framework, conceptual framework, will be what? Only 3 components. When you have initially in your proposal, you had 6. But your final one is going to depict what? 3. That is fine. That is fine. Remember, initially that is your researcher's idea. You are thinking this is what will influence, but people are saying no. Your thinking can be right to you because it's your perspective. But that's no. That is based on our own usage, our own feeling, our own understanding about this. Only these 3 have an impact. Then you depict what? Only 3. hand. So in a conceptual framework, you have an earlier conceptual framework and you have a final conceptual framework. In your proposal, what you're going to have in your proposal, if you're using framework, is what? You have an initial framework, and then the final one will be what? When you have collected your data, you have done your analysis, what your findings now will inform your what? Your final what? Conceptual framework. Any question, guys? Okay. Now, there are in going further, there is integration of framework, which I've talked about. I talked about it earlier, right? Which is what? Integration of what? A framework. A researcher can ensure that their study is well grounded in an established framework, also providing a clear explanation of the relationship between those frameworks. Perfect. Now, the integration enhances the rigor and the credibility of the findings, making them more useful and acceptable to the researcher field. What this simply means is this, that what? I said it before that a framework may not completely answer your idea, your question, right? Thank you. You take that very framework that answers those components, and then you mix it with the one that is not there. That is an integration. In that way, now, what this means that what is gonna be more receptive in terms of what people believe in, because you borrowed your knowledge from existing what framework. So the alignment with the research questions is very important, which I've talked about before. Now, let me also stress it. It is crucial or critical ensuring that your study design and analysis are coherent and focused. Now, when you're able to align your research, your framework component to your research questions and those hypotheses and objectives, it makes it that you have a focused research. You are not running everywhere. This is what you want to address. You are focused to it. By connecting the conceptual framework to the research questions, researchers can effectively guide their data collection and analysis method, leading to more systematic and insightful exploration of the research topic. When you are able to connect your conceptual framework, yes, to your research questions, it gives you more clarity on the kind of data you are going to collect, and also how to analyze it, the kind of analysis you're also going to conduct when you're going to carry out in your research, which also provide more insightful analysis in terms of what? Exploring your research topic more in depth. Also, the alignment also assists in terms of what? Helping the researchers to justify their research direction, which also contribute to the overall rigor and the clarity of the research process. Very important. Any question, guys? Any question?
No,
Okay.
bro.
Okay, thank you. In conclusion, deeper understanding of literature review and its importance is a very good thing that you need to do. You need to